Welcome everyone to our episode 105. I am with an honored guest with Heidi Dunstan, and today we are going to talk about a complex topic, but we are going to try to make it a lot much better for people to realize that we all have to pass through those difficult times, and we are going to talk about grieving with grace. Heidi is a certified grief educator and best-selling author. Her passion to help others learn more about grief and how to support others who are grieving came after losing her husband unexpectedly almost 3 years ago. Her experience with friends and loved ones saying the wrong thing or completely disappearing gave her firsthand knowledge that many people have learned how to grieve, which often leaves grievers to grieve in isolation. Thank you, Heidi. And well, as usual, my first question to everyone is, how did you arrive with the purpose of today?
Well, thanks so much for having me, David. It's an honor to be here, especially because I've listened to your podcast before. So it's really cool to be a guest. And how I arrived to be here is kind of a sad story. Like my bio says, I lost my husband unexpectedly in 2018.
Mm.
It was 2 days after Christmas and the day before my 40th birthday. And he was planning a party. For my birthday, it was a surprise. I found out about it. We just come home from Costco. We were buying groceries, and he
Mhm.
had a massive heart attack and didn't survive. And I've come to want to teach people about grief and teach people what to say and not say to somebody who's grieving, because I found in my story of grief is that I had great people around me, but they often didn't know what to say. So they either said things that missed the mark and that kind of hurt,
Mm.
or they went silent, and that silence was deafening, and left me grieving them as well, and those friendships and those relationships along the way. And
Mm.
as I spent more and more time with other grievers, I found out my story wasn't unusual, that all of us that are grieving tend to go through it. And I realized it's because we've never been taught what to say, how to react. It's uncomfortable. We can't fix it. And I want to be able to help people so that we don't have to grieve alone, and that we can, if we need to have people around us, have people that know that it's an uncomfortable conversation, but that they have some tools in how to support somebody who's going through grief.
Oh, thank you. Actually, it was really well how the universe works, because yesterday I just found out that a friend of mine that I knew from a long time ago passed away, and I listened to the notice and I went to to see her husband and the family. And as you mentioned, I could feel that we are all everywhere in the world. I think we are all experiencing that uncomfortable moments of not knowing what to say, and um, recognizing that, well, it's a phase, it's a transition, is of course painful, but the more natural, the more open you are towards the person that is grieving, I think that's usually, well, the safest, let's say,
Yeah.
and the easiest way to just start a conversation and just probably reminding them about the beautiful moments that you experienced. No.
Yeah, and my sympathies go to you. Losing a friend is a significant loss.
Yeah.
May I ask your friend's name?
Yes, Monica.
Monica. That's a
Mm.
beautiful name.
Yes.
And losing people, whether it's family or friends, they are significant. And something as simple as asking somebody's name when you don't know it can be like, hey, thanks so much for
Mhm.
acknowledging the fact that my person is gone, and I want to find a place where they exist. And so something that simple can make such a big difference rather than saying nothing at all. And
Yeah.
so, thank you for being open and sharing that you're experiencing a loss, because
Mhm.
it also means that, I didn't have to say, I'm sorry for your loss. I don't love the I'm sorry for your loss, because it's I'm
Mhm.
sorry for your loss. I don't want to deal with it because it's uncomfortable. And so I often say, like, losing a friend is a significant loss. Losing a pet is really hard. Losing a child never makes sense. The words matter in grief, and that's why people get quiet. That's why, because we're so afraid we're going to say the wrong thing. And so I kind of equate it to, like, when we go to the gym, it kind of hurts and it's uncomfortable and we're stiff. We got to work our grief muscle. We gotta get used to the words. We've got to be okay with being uncomfortable. We got to be okay with, we might say the wrong thing at the wrong time. And it's okay to say, I just stuck my foot in my mouth and I'm sorry. You're important to me, and that's not what I meant to say. And just owning it, knowing as a griever, knowing that, hey, these people aren't trying to do this with malice. They're doing it because they're uncomfortable, just as uncomfortable as you are. The hard part is that they're in such pain if it's a close loss that they don't have a big filter. They're like, hey, like, don't hurt me any more than I'm already hurt. And so, when we can be graceful, when a griever can be graceful with the people around them to say, hey, they're doing the best they can. And when the people around them say, I've got to give them some grace, they're not at their best either. And how do we meet in the middle? It can make such a big difference. And so I teach people things like, instead of asking, how are you? Ask, how's today? Where are you at today? Because grief can leave us living in the moment. And it can be hard, breath by breath, moment by moment, minute by minute, evening by evening. And so say, hey, like, where are you at? Like, because when we say, how are you? You're supposed to say good, fine, or okay.
Yeah.
And typically you're none of those when you're grieving. And so when you say, how's today? It's like, have you had dinner? How are you able to sleep?
Yeah.
I lost 30 pounds in the first 3 months after my husband died. And a lot of people were like, wow, you look fabulous. I had one friend who said, have you lost all this weight because you're not eating?
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah. I said, I have zero ability to cook more than one thing on the stove at a time. And two, when I eat, I always feel like I'm going to get sick. And she's like, I'd like to have you over for dinner and maybe come over and watch a movie and we can have popcorn and I'm going to send you home with some leftovers. She just leaned in and made it comfortable, right? It wasn't hard. And I call a lot of my programs lean into grief. It's those moments when we feel like we should walk away or that we should cross the street and avoid the conversation. Those are the moments we're meant to lean in and support somebody. And be okay. Get used to the fact that it's going to be uncomfortable. You can't fix it. Their person has died.
Yeah.
And so just be okay with the fact that they're not okay right now. And they just need you to show up and hold space for them.
Yes. Many, many times I was reading, as I mentioned last week, I was researching about grief and the stages and all of those things. And there's a graphic that is very famous about the Kubler-Ross 5 stages of grieving.
Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, yeah.
Yeah. And I was just amazed because I lived that yesterday. So the first stage is shock. It's like, how or why? And you start asking a lot of questions. And of course, that from there you move to frustration because you are either angry or you don't understand or you want to solve the things. And well, I think pretty much everyone experiences those two very difficult stages and the intrusive thoughts that you have. No.
Well, I think it's, the tricky part with stages, and I love the Kubler-Ross stuff, but I want you to remember that it's the 5 stages of dying. It's the stages that you go through when you find out you're ill and dying. It's not necessarily the stages of grief. The hard part with stages in our mind is that we finish it and it should be done. But with grief, it's not like that. You could be shocked at the day they die, and you could be shocked 6 months later. You could be angry over, I call it the hot mess. And so realize that there's stages, but doesn't mean one and done.
Yeah.
But the other thing too is that I also say that we've got to be able to acknowledge the fact that people are moving through it at their own pace. Grief as individuals, our fingerprint. And so how I move through grief may look completely different than how you move through grief, right? I'm a sprinkler. I cry a lot. You may not cry. and that's okay. And so when we can leave the judgment out of it and the self-judgment as, am I doing it wrong? Like, how come I'm not crying? I see in the movies they cry all the time.
Mm.
Well, they may not cry, and that's okay. And when we cannot judge somebody and just see exactly where they're at, it can make such a big difference. And
Mm.
the other piece that I wanted to mention is about the shock. The other piece that we do, and I think some of this comes to us watching crime TV, like the Law and Orders and the CSIs, is we often ask, what happened? How did they die? What was the cause of death?
Yeah.
And the hard part is you noticed I didn't ask how your friend died because I might want to know, but knowing doesn't help me support you. And
Mm-hmm.
so if that was your spouse that had passed, I'm now going to ask you how they died and make you relive that moment. And so I never ask cause of death. I
Mm.
never say, hey, what happened? Because I can't fix it. I can't bring that person back from the dead,
Mm-hmm.
but I can say, hey, I'm here for you. You're important to me and I want to support you. And if you care to share it with me, I'm happy to hold that space. But I never want somebody to have to relive that day if they choose not to.
Mm-hmm.
And if I feel that I need to know, if it was somebody that I need to know, I learned this. Somebody asked me this about 9 months after my husband died, was instead of saying what was the cause of death, because he was a friend of my husband's and he saw him a week before he died, he said, may I ask what happened? Not what was the cause of death, but may I ask what happened? He
Mm.
asked for permission for me to go there. Are you okay talking about this right now? May I ask? Is a very different question than
Yeah.
what was the cause of death or how did they die? And so be gentle with people. Know that the cause of death, you don't actually need to know to how to hold space.
Mm.
We can just be with people and say, hey, this hurts. This is hard. I see how important they are to you. They made a big difference in my life, right? So know that we can't fix things, and so we don't always need information.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I totally agree that we need to be more empathetic with the place that the other person is living and not just go with the first curiosity that we have about things that of course that is human but is not um, empathic.
Well, and I think the hard part is that we've got this morbid curiosity, like how did they die? And now with COVID and cancer and things that people die commonly of, it seems to minimize. Oh, they had cancer. Well, people with cancer die. Oh, they had COVID. Lots of people died with COVID. Well, I didn't have lots of people in my life die, right? Like this person was important to me. And so it's
Mhm.
hard. And so sometimes asking can minimize. And it's weird. Like, I mean, I travel quite a bit, so I spend time in Ubers and taxis, and they always ask, are you married? I say, no, I'm widowed. Oh, how did your husband die? This was a taxi driver. Like, why do you need to know how he died? Right? Like, be
Yeah.
cognizant of the fact that you don't need to know. You don't need to make me live that day, right? No different than all of us know where we were the day Princess Diana died. We all know where we were when 9/11 happened. Like the day somebody died, it has it's etched in their being. And
Mhm.
if they don't want to have to go there, don't make them. Let them choose if they want to go there, right? So
Yeah.
it's about being graceful with it.
Mhm. That's a very good way to just be very gentle with your words. And
Yeah.
I like the way that you also talk about handling the places that are going to be painful with also more awareness, because I also was thinking about those thoughts that many times spiral you through the negativity or through the things. How did you handle those kind of thoughts when they happen? Because sometimes they are random thoughts and they just come and go.
Yeah.
So what did you
Yeah.
do
I
to?
mean, the world has triggers, right? Like we can be in the grocery store and they could be playing music, and all of a sudden the song
Mhm.
that you was important to you comes playing, or you see their favorite food, or there's lots of triggers, for example, in a grocery store, or you may walk by somebody who's wearing your person's cologne or perfume, and a scent will catch you. And so grief can hit at any moment. And let me tell you, David, I tried to schedule grief. I was like, hey, I got 2 hours tonight, I'm going to grieve then. It doesn't work like that. It hits when it hits, and it can hit. It can be quite frequent in those early days, months, weeks, and even the year and a half before you kind of get your feet under you after you've had a major loss, like a spouse or a child. And then it'll be, you'll start to get your feet under you. And not to say that people always ask, does grief get easier? And I say it never gets easier, it gets different. It becomes a little less frequent and a little less regular. But it can be just as intense as the day you've lost your person for different reasons. It could be Mother's Day, Father's Day, a birthday, an anniversary. It could be the age, you could be turning the age your spouse turned when they died. Like, there's lots of different things that go on, right? And so be gentle with them, with people like that. Be gentle with the fact that there is no timeline. We don't get to tell somebody, oh, it's been 6 months, you should be over it by now. Grief doesn't work like that. And be gentle with yourself. For me, though, after the 1 year mark, I was like, okay, I got all the anniversaries out of my way. I should be able to move forward now. It doesn't work like that. I still have hard days. And so when I go through those hard days, one, I allow myself to move through the emotions, which in our world, we don't like pain. We don't like being uncomfortable. But the reality is if you don't move through them, they're gonna keep coming up. And so when I had to move through them, and what stopped me from moving through them was I was like, why do I have to go through this again? And the why kept me in my head. When I just said, hey, I'm angry today, or I'm sad today, it put me back in my heart and allowed me to move through those emotions so I could move forward again. And on those days when it got really dark and it got really hard, those are the days that I practiced gratitude. I was so grateful I had my husband, Mike. All the things. I was grateful that we got to travel. I was grateful that we both had jobs that we could work from home. I was grateful for so many things, and gratitude always got me through it. Right. So, and then I also had a support network. I made sure I had a grief counselor, somebody who specialized in grief, not just a therapist. And then I had people that I trusted to support me when I needed it. People that were special to me, that I was willing to share my story with, because not everybody deserves to hear everything, because they do come with judgment. And I didn't want to be judged. I had some people who were like, Heidi, you're so strong. You got this. I didn't feel very strong, David. I felt broken. And it took a lot of courage to get up some days and put one foot in front of the other. And so I needed people who could acknowledge the fact that I was hurting, that it was hard, and that were able to say, hey, Heidi, I see how courageous you're being today. I know it would have been easier to stay in bed. I see that you're doing the best you can. I often equate judgment and grief. I always say judgment is grief's kryptonite. When we judge ourselves or when we judge others who are grieving, it really stops connection. And I believe that grief is love. It would not hurt if we didn't love our person. And so when we grieve, it's because we're loving our person that isn't here. We're trying to figure out how to navigate a world that's kept spinning without them on it. And, I tell people, have you ever watched like America's Got Talent or those talent shows when they've got the golden buzzer? Have you ever seen a show like that?
Yeah.
We never judge how people celebrate. We never judge how people move through joy and happiness.
No.
Right? When on America's Got Talent, when they get that golden buzzer, they don't all celebrate the same.
No.
But we do judge how people move through pain. And when we can realize, hey, saying to somebody, it's been 6 months, aren't you over it? Why are you still wearing your wedding band? Aren't you ready to move forward? The funeral's over. My husband's funeral was on a Friday, and on a Sunday, I had a client email me, the list of things to do for Heidi's growing. When are you going to be back to work, or should I find somebody else? Just 2 days after his funeral. It's like, my response was, find somebody else.
Yeah, of course.
Like, just because the funeral happened doesn't mean I'm ready to be back at work full tilt again. Those graceful conversations can make such a big difference when you turn around and say, hey, your whole world is turned upside down and inside out. How can I support you? Instead of call me if you need me.
That
Right?
sounds much better. Yeah.
Yeah. And so
Well,
I love teaching people what to say and not say to somebody who's grieving, so that when somebody is going through grief, and we'll all go through grief, that they actually know that they've got some tools, that they know, hey, I did stick my foot in my mouth and it's okay to say I'm sorry, that they're important to me. And I want people to have support so that people don't have to grieve alone, that we can grieve and honor the people we've lost together.
and as you mentioned, the social circle that you can have is extremely important, because you need those kind of friends that, as you mentioned, they are not going to judge you. They are just going to listen and try to, well, they are more empathetic with you because they place themselves and they even sometimes feel what you are feeling, and you can just recognize that because you feel open and you feel healed, I would say. No.
Yeah, it's about holding space, and sometimes it's not even about sitting and talking. You don't have to have, you can't fix this. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's just sitting. Like, I remember it was about 11 months after Mike died, and I was really nervous. I mean, he died right around Christmas, right by my birthday. So I had all these anniversaries coming up, and I was very anxious. And I
Mm-hmm.
was in a restaurant with a friend, and I just messy cried. And they weren't trying to hand me Kleenex or trying to hide me from the people. They just let me cry.
Mm-hmm.
And they just said, I see how hard this is for you. And they just held space. They just let me be. And they
Mm-hmm.
didn't try to fix it. Oh, Heidi, like, don't worry, it'll be okay. Like, it was like, it's not okay right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm honored to be with you. I'm honored to witness this with you, even though it can't be comfortable. Watching somebody emotionally hurt like that is not easy.
Mm-hmm.
But just to say, I don't want you to have to do this alone. I'm honored that I often say to people are always, I'm sorry I'm crying. Thank you for sharing your tears with me,
Mm-hmm.
right? And not just please don't cry, I'll make you cry, you make me cry too. Thank you for sharing your tears. And if I cry with them, say, hey, it's because I feel you very deeply,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And that's all we need to do, is just love people exactly where they're at, good, bad, and ugly. On the good days, say, hey, I see that it's a little lighter for you today. You know, I'm I'm sending you a hug. I'm thinking about you. Popping in your calendar the person that they lost their birthday on a yearly reminder, so you can reach out and say, sending you a hug today. I know you must be thinking about your person.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's about honoring people and seeing them. As time passes, and more people, like, as time passes and the birthdays get further away, the Father's Days, the holidays, people often lose sight of being able to acknowledge the fact that they've lost somebody that they cherish, and yet it could still be very front of mind for them. So just turning around and saying, hey, I'm sending you a hug. I know that it's been a few years since you lost your dad, and I want you to know I'm thinking about you. You're important to me. It can really make a difference where somebody says, hey, thank you. Nobody else remembered. Thank you for seeing me. You know, it can be a beautiful way to hold space for somebody years after.
Yeah. And did you have children?
No, no,
No. Okay.
no. But I mean, again, when there's children involved, when somebody's lost a spouse, turn around and say, hey, driving my kids to school, can I pick your kids up too? Hey, I'm picking up groceries. What can I pick up for you? Or, The group of us are going to come and help with yard work and just
Mhm.
offer instead of saying, what do you need done? Because in those early days, weeks, and months, they don't know what they need. It's just there. It's
Yeah.
hard. And so just show up. Just say, hey, what day can we come and help you with the yard work?
Mhm.
You know, I mean, when my husband passed, we lived in a condo complex. So there was a big community garbage can. Well, I had lots of people coming to visit and they didn't know how to deal with the garbage. And my neighbor just said, have everybody leave the garbage on the step and we will come and take it. And that sounds like super small,
Mhm.
but it sure made my life a lot easier trying to teach people like who were because sometimes I would go and lay down and they would clean up or tidy up around the house and they didn't know where to put the garbage. And it's just easy. Just leave it on the step. It'll be taken care of. Something as simple as that can make such a big difference. 5 years later, I still remember it, right?
Mhm.
They just showed up in a beautiful way.
Yeah. And I was reading in your bio that some people just isolate you. I think that how did you handle that, or how do you help people to process that some of the friends are going to just be isolating themselves because they don't know what to say? No.
You know what? If they're really important to you, reach out and say, hey, I'd like you to connect with Heidi or go on my website and have them listen to a couple of my podcasts. I offer free master classes. Know that it isn't personal. Know that nobody's malice in trying to move through grief.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody's like, oh, your dad died. Let's kick you while you're down. They're quiet because they don't know what to say and they're
Mm-hmm.
afraid to say the wrong thing. And we don't live in a culture, especially North American culture, we don't live in a culture that handles pain well. And so what we do is pretend that it doesn't exist. And by pretending means we don't talk about it. And so it feels like you don't fit anymore because as a griever, living in this pain and nobody's acknowledging it. And you're like, how is this happening? So as a griever, one, know that people aren't doing it to be malicious. I lost four of our best friends. There were six of us that all hung out, three couples. I never saw the other two couples after Mike's funeral because I was a reminder to them that Mike was gone. And
Mm-hmm.
it took me a long time to figure that out, but that was the big piece of it. It was like they didn't they saw me and Mike was missing, and that was too hard for them to process. Not for me to I meant I lost my friends and I had to move through that, and it was hard.
Mm-hmm.
But know that it isn't personal. Know that it's because we aren't equipped to deal with this stuff. We haven't been taught. You know, when I have these conversations often, and people are always like, I've always just been taught to write a card, go to a funeral, send some flowers, and maybe make a lasagna. That's all I know how to do.
Yeah.
They don't know how to say, hey, I see you. I see that this is hard. I see this hurts. I see you're losing weight. I see you're gaining weight. I didn't eat. Some people eat more. It's like, hey, can we go for walks? Can we go and do like, how can I support you? You
Mhm.
know,
And as you mentioned, there are just, well, they can be or they can seem like simple activities, but they just show you the support and the that you matter to them, no?
yeah. Especially when you love somebody exactly where they're at. So
Mm-hmm.
if they're angry, be like, hey, I see this is hard and I see that you're angry right now. You know, that you don't have to tell them they're not allowed to be angry. You know, I mean, I use humor quite a bit. And so there's times where I crack jokes or I call Mike names and people are like, oh, that was disrespectful. And I'm like, that's how Mike and I were in our everyday life. So I'm the same. And so, just love people exactly where they're at. Turn around and don't be like, hey, I wouldn't do it that way. Or,
Yeah.
oh, they're dating already. Oh, they're having another baby, right? But we don't get to choose. We don't get to. It is truly as individuals our own fingerprints. So turn around and say, I'm glad that's working for you.
Mm-hmm.
And if it didn't work out, turn around and say, I'm glad you had the courage to try.
Mm.
Right? Because it is really hard moving forward in a world where your person isn't there anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And it can take a lot of courage to go, hey, what do I do? How do I move through the next steps? So be gracious, be gentle with your words, you know, be kind. That's all that people want.
Nice. If you could say in one sentence an advice for people, what would you say is the most important thing?
When you are trying to support somebody who's grieving, lean in, turn around and say, I don't have words rather than nothing. Or say, hey, I see you're hurting. And I just want you to know you're important to me and I'd like to support you the best way that I can. And I may mess it up, and be honest with me. Give the griever permission to tell you, hey, that stung,
Mm-hmm.
so that you can fix it.
Mm.
And just lean in so that we can grieve with grace together. We don't have to do grief alone.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Heidi. I
Thank you,
think
David.
we can make another part for that, but
I would be
we
honored
will,
to.
yeah, we will leave it today at this. And thank you, everyone, for listening. We will have a second part for this interview, so stay tuned for the second part. And I really appreciate your vulnerability, Heidi, and thank you for all the great advice in how to talk to people that are grieving. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Bye.